this morning. First off, I would like to thank, as always, our sponsors, Haggerty and Haggerty Digital Services, as well as My Favorite Art Place for sponsoring this amazing event for us in this region for the World Creativity and Innovation Week. So thank you so much for all that you do for us. If you want to visit their websites, the information is here. I'll be putting information up on the chat. You can also get information on the Whova app at any time about our sponsors, our speakers, and our attendees and the sessions. So the Whova app also has everything that you need there. I will also say, if you have questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and put those in the chat or the Q&A section here on the Zoom app or in the Whova app as well. And we'll be able to get to some questions at the end of the presentation. So our first presentation is a quick interview and with Djimo Serodio. He's going to talk about the fascinating backstory of Just Learn. Learn the backstory of Just Learn, the innovative company that is bringing hand-on environmental education to tens of thousands of students. So let's watch this presentation and then we'll be back.
Here with Djimo Serodio from Just Learn, and we're going to find out about what you've been doing with Just Learn and the fascinating backstory, which is the name I made up for this presentation because I do find it fascinating. So Djimo, I'd like to just start out by you telling us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Sure. So from Mozambique. I was born and raised in Mozambique. I'm a third generation Portuguese from Mozambique, which is in Southeast Africa. And I've been living in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, for the last 10 years or so. Yeah, that's where I'm from, where I live.
That's super. So you've been living in Florida for the last 10 years. And what exactly is Just Learn?
Yeah, so Just Learn, in a sense, is a sense of urgency to address the environmental challenges of today through education. We've been working mostly with schools up until now, and now we're finally getting ready to serve as well the hobby and the homeschooling space. And it's really the culmination of what I've learned from agriculture and from this mission to address sort of the most responsible human activity currently contributing to environmental crisis, habitat loss, biodiversity loss, etc. You know the problem.
Yes, yeah, we're all hearing more and more about the problem. Well, that's really great that you're also expanding from classrooms to homeschoolers and to other types of organizations serving youth. So I've done a lot of work with youth. I have 4 kids myself. I've been a classroom teacher. I've done homeschooling. I have a Girl Scout troop. So I'm really interested actually in the process of what you're teaching the kids. So if you can walk us through it. And when I have questions, I'm going to just jump in and ask you.
Sure. Yeah. So I have some slides. Let me know when I should maybe show them to support the discussion.
I think so. It's always good to just see what's happening. So yeah, just show us what you're doing. So if I'm doing your program with my child or with some students, what exactly am I going to be doing with them, and what are they going to be learning?
Sure. So Just Learn is the company. Our first product is called Planet Box, and what it does is it brings down into a small, compact, packaged system that fits inside your home or your classroom. It brings to it the aquaponics technique, or the sciences of aquaponics, which happens to be an emerging technique for food production, but it's a great model system for understanding ecology, for understanding the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, and understanding how different organisms within the ecosystem interact. So while we are not necessarily just an agriculture or gardening course or activity, we are leveraging very much an agriculture technology to be able to look into that ecological phenomena and pair it to curriculum, whether it's very formal in traditional classroom settings or a little bit more informal and slightly hobby for home-based settings. And what's interesting about aquaponics is while it's it represents less than 2% of the actual food production globally because it's very small compared to alternative techniques. It nonetheless represents aquaculture, which is the fastest growing subsector in agriculture. So aquaponics by itself is small as an adopted technique globally, but it really combines two different techniques. So it combines aquaculture, which is the fish component, and hydroponics, which is the soilless, water-based plant component. Now, I should mention that a few years ago, our species went to sourcing over half of its fish protein from farmed aquaculture versus a wild caught. We have plateaued our consumption of wild caught fish, but what's really scary is we have put more and more resources to fishing. So what's really happening is the oceans are actually being depleted of fish. It's not that we have respected its carrying capacity. We really haven't. And so aquaculture, while it carries a little bit of a negative connotation that, hey, I'd much rather eat wild caught fish and not farmed fish, actually, eating aquaculture fish could have a huge environmental benefit because you're alleviating the natural supplies of fish from the oceans. So there are right ways to fish farm, bad ways to fish farm. Ultimately, we need to learn more about what's possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, let me ask you this. So in terms of farm caught fish, do they actually utilize the plant aspect of this? Are they doing, if 50% of the fish are farm caught, do they integrate this type of a system in it or not?
Well, that's a really good question. What's happening is, in aquaculture, when there are no plants, you have a waste byproduct that is usually dumped into, the oceans or into the river systems, much like there is agriculture runoff from fertilizers. So that fish byproduct is packed with nutrients and it will disrupt natural habitat or a natural ecosystem. So farmers are looking into aquaponics to combine their aquaculture facilities with a plant-based agriculture system. And with those two, now you have aquaponics, which is what the system represents.
Okay, so we're not doing that, is what you're saying. Right now, that is not what's happening. Right now, we're just doing the fish farming without the full cycle, which is what we need to do.
Well, absolutely. Most of the farmed fish is just the recirculating aquaculture systems, which is without the plant component. There are certainly efficiencies from just focusing on growing fish because it's relatively easy to isolate the nutrient runoff and discharge it. And there are certainly complexities to introducing plants into this closed loop. But there are also a lot of benefits, such as no water changes, reduction in fertilizer needs, etc. So it is an emerging field. It's very, very promising, and we're trying to bring it right into the classroom as a tool, and not just for the agriculture agenda, but really the environmental and ecological agenda that we need to learn more from.
Wonderful. That makes a lot of sense. Well, good. Well, show us what you have here.
Sure. So the way it works is fish produce waste, not just fish feces, but a respiratory byproduct that feeds bacteria. That bacteria actually thrive in that somewhat toxic environment, but they do nitrify the toxic form into a plant edible fertilizer form. And as plants grow, they remove those nutrients from the water and they return fresh water for the fish, which means, in best case scenarios, you actually have no water changes needed. So it's very much self-cleaning at a microbial level, which is very inspiring, and we should learn as much as we can to adopt those principles in as many industries as possible, so to speak. Circular economy definitely tries to encapsulate that idea. But this is a system in the classroom. In the classroom, what happens is the biological process of aquaponics, which is really that inoculation period, recruiting bacteria, feeding the bacteria.
Now tell me I'm sorry, I'm going to just back you up there. So what is the inoculation period? So we put the box into the classroom. And so tell me what that means.
Sure. So I have a video here. So you set up your planter box in the classroom. You fill it up with water, you decorate it, you add your decoration. I personally like natural, vibes, not so much the more fluorescent vibes. You fill it up with this medium. This medium is called hydrogen. It's a soil alternative. What it does is it serves as a place where the plant roots can hold on to, but it's also where the surface area for the bacteria take place. And this is an environment that you need to inoculate. It doesn't necessarily have the right bacteria present that would be able to convert the fish waste into a plant fertilizer. So although it can happen naturally, we are speeding up that process. And so we set that up, and after a while you introduce fish and you can have plants growing. So it's one step after the other. And that's
So I'm going to back you up right there. So inoculate, that just basically means that you're adding the bacteria to it.
Yes, and not just directly adding, but creating the conditions to naturally recruit them. So the bacteria we need are actually all over the place. They're everywhere. They are less present in certain sterile environments like clinics and health centers that we've actually witnessed much slower inoculation process. But that's just, the environment is so sterile. But for the most part, that bacteria exists naturally. The cycling period or the inoculation period without intervention takes, 4 to 7 weeks, and you can accelerate it by really inoculating with bacteria, and that can be as little as a week to 2 weeks. So that science is understood, the metabolism is established, which is the bacteria really serves as a foundation to allow the introduction of fish. And really the reason fish die most of the time are because the fish tank is not prepared to receive that fish, and it's not prepared to convert the fish waste into a fertilizer. And so this is all done in sequence, but we pair it with the existing curriculum that teachers already have to teach, whether it's in 7th grade or in 9th grade or in 12th grade, or even at the elementary level. These concepts, for the most part, are repeated at different age groups, and it gets more in depth, right? So, you can introduce carrying capacity in 6th grade or 7th grade, but you can really explore its complexities and synergies in more depth at the high school environmental science class, for example. Following all of that, we have an app that we are in early beta right now. It helps with a lot of the data collection. So data is definitely a huge piece here, whether it's understanding how pH of the water changes or how the presence of those different nutrients changes over time, which really are the tools we use to understand how our process is working. That's all very important. We've streamlined that process. It comes with chemistry kits like these files that you understand the different pH parameters and variables for water. And on top of that, PlanetBox is really just a central tool. It's the reason it's called PlanetBox is as an analogy for the natural world we live in, right? But there are all types of STEM activities that we're pairing with it to expand beyond environmental science or the biology, but into other fields, such as computer science, electricity, or maybe genetics in more detail. Examples of those activities are introducing, concepts of circuitry and amperage and wattage using renewable energy solutions. So now you're applying physics into sort of the clean tech world, learning computer science by turning on and off the light, manipulating the system. So you're applying usually a very technical conceptual framework into something you can physically manifest. And then you can isolate specific genetic activities like Mendelian genetics, where you see different dominant and recessive traits in peas over a few generations. There are all types of activities. But that's really what we do, is we are packaging existing and emerging solutions, watering them down for education, pairing it with existing curriculum, applying those phenomena in environments that usually require science expeditions, field trips, observing the outside world, but doing so, very easily inside the classroom or inside your home.
Right. No, that's wonderful. So if I were to use this with a classroom or with my own child, what would be the length of time, like kind of the minimum length of time that I would want to anticipate doing the whole program in order for them to get the maximum benefit from it?
Yeah, it's so think of aquaponics like a life cycle. At least that's how we've structured it.
Mhm.
We really tackled the hardest problem by starting with public school systems. Um, Schools have an academic year, usually 2 semesters, and we start early in the first semester and end late in the second semester. Um, and that can achieve all of what aquaponics has to offer for sure, where you achieve a perpetually harvested system where minimum inputs, very low maintenance, and you just have different crops being rotated. But then beyond that, you can add your engineering modules, or you can disassemble it and get it ready for next year. But if you're at home, there's no need to disassemble it. You now just have a very low maintenance garden that you can continue with for a long time. In fact, it gets richer and healthier over time. I have some, I don't have some photos. I had some photos open for you here that can share a little bit more of different examples of planter boxes in classrooms.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. While you're getting those up, so what are some of the different types of crops that kids have
Yes.
grown?
So let me show you right now. So these are just a couple of examples. Really, you can grow anything that fits in it. Certain crops like fruiting crops or flowering crops require a little bit more of a few resources that take more time to build, to accumulate, such as potassium and phosphate. But most of your microgreens, your leafy greens, they grow quite easily from the beginning. So here's an example of some microgreens. You can actually grow this at home with planter box, and you could supplement your salads or your dressings or your garnishes. You can grow your traditional heads of lettuce. You can have herbs. So here, I think these two are herbs. That's what is that, rosemary or thyme? I always get thyme. I get confused between the two.
Yeah.
But you can also pursue. Oh, so here's some basil.
Oh, wow.
Ornamental plants, some mint. But what's actually very interesting for me is that, again, we're not an agricultural gardening specific tool, right? So this is really meant to explore ecology as well. And so I like this example where this classroom started with 3 systems. They actually grouped them very closely together. So there's 3 separate water biomes, but the terrestrial biome is sort of combined in a sense. And they built out a lot of the food pyramid and trophic levels as a preparation exercise. And then they started introducing native plants local to them, and as well as some edible plants. And ecologically, this is, using biodiversity, you're building carrying capacity. And so this is a clear example where 1 + 1 = 3 equation that Mother Nature does so brilliantly. And they actually had to introduce ladybugs for pest control, which ended up attracting lizards, and the lizards came naturally. It was an indirect outcome, but it just goes to show that.
The teacher was thrilled.
Well, yeah, usually you don't want a lizard. Well, I love lizards, but
I do
usually,
too. I love lizards.
yes, I'm happy when I see them. But usually,
Yeah.
people keep a distance. But in this case, they were definitely part of the community.
No, that's great. Now, so when you use it the next year, if you don't have to start over again because you don't have that summer break, can you continue to use the same soil, the same medium that you put into it in the first place?
Yeah, so the medium lasts pretty much forever. It's non-soluble, it's pH neutral. It's really just an environment where the bacteria attach to. We have a protocol on how to disassemble and sort of clean it up at the end of the year. And over the course of summer, it sterilizes as it dries. And then you pretty much pick it up from scratch again for the following year. You could keep it going, as many fish tanks are. but we recommend always experiencing the complete aquaponics life cycle from beginning to end, especially for educators who are using them year after year. For home, you don't need to disassemble it.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So the medium doesn't break down, so it retains its shape, its sphere shape.
It does.
And
it does.
so is there any part of this that needs to be replaced, or does it just, like, how long does something like this last?
Yeah, so there are consumables like your seeds, your fish feed, definitely water. The only trouble we've had are pumps going bad, but those are easy fixes. We just send them out if they're within warranty. They can break from malfunction, or they can be used incorrectly, where water is not added at the right time, and so that you're actually frying the pump. So we're trying to understand how those happen, but for the most part, these are easily replaceable items.
That's really great. So how soon will this be available on Amazon?
Oh, I'm hoping within the next couple of weeks. The store is actually built on Amazon already. We were just completing some legal work to be able to list it publicly. We've dealt with, even though we're serving almost 30,000 students nationally, we have very intimate relationships with all of our customers. So this was not available for public purchase, but now it's definitely going to get to that level.
That's terrific. That's terrific. So what would you suggest to somebody who was interested in it? Do you think, could they just get it out of the box and they'd be able to use it? Or is there like a course, a teacher's course, or how do you do it for somebody that gets it delivered to them?
Well, yeah, so this is how we as a company are also improving over time. We've had instructional materials in the past, whether it's video tutorials or, tutorials in writing that educators and students can refer to. But with the new app, we have built out tutorial modules. So really the same place, and within the dashboard that you collect data, you also have access to support, to tutorials, to videos, to photos, to observations, libraries, all types of cool stuff. And we're hoping that we grow that adoption, not just in formal education settings where we're adding value as well to reporting mechanisms for educators, but also in the homeschool settings where the project-based learning is in parallel to an aquaponic system.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned earlier that this is a gender neutral type of instructional method to use, and I've done a lot of work with the Pinellas Education Foundation on closing the gender achievement gap. So that very much piqued my interest. So I wanted to just find out from you if you had some stories or just some examples of that you could share, because I find that very, very interesting. Anytime we can give our kids something that's hands-on and tangible is such a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, experiential learning is definitely very important. It's a trend, project-based learning. But for the most part, there still is there are gaps, and there are lack of clarity in certain areas how to engage with hands-on experiential learning that directly supports sort of the standards adopted globally. What becomes pronounced in some gaps are not being gender agnostic. So certain STEM fields really are more male dominant or female dominant. And so I think it makes sense in some areas, but in others, it's just a stereotypical and systemic sort of inertia that has taken us there. But an ecosystem or a garden or fish and plants, it's a really neutral way to approach computer science or to approach, a very isolated STEM field, such as microbiology, etc. So I think it levels the playing field, not just across genders, but also socioeconomic sort of barriers that are in place. Most of our schools are actually Title I schools. So we try to solve the problem for public school systems in the most challenged school systems. And I think we've really achieved something, and now we are going to trickle it up into private schools, into home-based learning, and also have the research and the data collection and the sense of community behind these tools reach each other and be interconnected.
That's terrific. And you had mentioned earlier as well that there are some adjacent fields in this area that would support what you're doing. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, gosh, there are a few supporting areas. So whether it's more on the agriculture side, I think that agriculture as a specific industry, one that I am biased because I'm not into other STEM fields as much as I am into agriculture. So there's definitely a bias personally for me and perhaps for a lot of people who look at aquaponics. But it's understanding and learning from nature really. And Becca, my colleague, she's talking about how to solve these problems through diversity in another engagement in this conference. And I would encourage you to look at that and to listen to her. But what's interesting is nature has done so much of this, come up with this over evolutionary biology over a long time. And what we as humans have done in the last 100 to 200 years are not necessarily in alignment with how nature does it. And so what's particularly interesting for me is to leverage these natural cycles and resources and ingredients from aquaponics to try and apply it into other fields, whether it's permaculture or whether it's improving the way we do monocrop plantations or how we reduce habitat loss or biodiversity loss by embracing some of nature's solutions. I think that's really the message which fits into sort of the circular economy we need to design and adopt. But personally for me, I think that agriculture is just an absolutely urgent space that we need to inspire as many careers as possible, prepare as much workforce as possible, do so with diversity, and really attack this problem head first as soon as possible.
No, I would agree. So basically what you're saying is this particular model that you've developed, which is totally based on nature, could be expanded, and this could be how we farm. So instead of wiping out forests and instead of destroying valuable land that we have, that we're doing other things with, we could actually use this technology to farm our fish and farm our food, and it would all be circular. We would stop producing the waste, and it would just produce more food and basically help the environment.
Sure. Yeah, I think it goes both ways. So on one end, if we really look about the destruction that agriculture has, we're competing with the most sort of soil-rich habitats. We're stripping forests and we're replacing them with monocrop fields such as cornfields. That has only increased. It's happening at a scary pace, and it's affecting our world's natural carrying capacity. It's biodiversity, and it's just a bad direction. On the other hand, some phenomena are hard to understand and grasp. So, for example, an algae bloom, which is a complex consequence of fertilizer runoff, for example, whether it's over time because of the aggressive sort of the amounts of fertilizers used in farming that make their way to rivers and delta systems, or whether it's a overnight event like what's happening in the Tampa Bay area right now with phosphate runoff. But the consequences ecologically to that, like an algae bloom, are usually unknown by most people. Certainly a lot of scientists know what it means, but it's usually a little bit hard for a student to grasp. So just to be practical here, an algae bloom what actually happens is there's a lot of nutrients. You're feeding, algae, they go on a feeding frenzy. Now all of a sudden they're competing with other organisms for oxygen and then there's other downstream effects. And all of this can be witnessed in planet boxed or in an aquaponic system. So you can induce that algae bloom or bacterial bloom. You can observe what that ecosystem is doing over weeks or months until you're basically back to normal. You can intervene, you can witness, observe it, etc. So
wow.
So this is a tool really.
Schools can see what's happening in Tampa Bay right in their classroom, so they don't have to just hear about it. They can actually observe it right in their classroom, or if it's a homeschooling mom or whatever, because we hear about it on the news. We hear about algae blooms. We hear about the devastating results of those things, but you don't get to see it. So what you're product is doing is actually giving people reality, giving students reality on what's happening in our environment.
Sure, sure. And that's why it's important to not think of aquaponics, or the way we're framing it with curriculum, as not just a technical professional development agriculture course, but really much more of an environmental tech tool. And then how do you deal with that algae? Well, you add an algae feeder, which is, in a sense, one new species. You're building that diversity, which builds carrying capacity. So that analogy all of a sudden can also be witnessed in an ecosystem like PlanetBox. And that's what we're trying to do, is making these experiences as accessible and seamless as possible for students to observe.
Wonderful. Well, I think now is a good time to break and take some questions. So are you ready for that?
Absolutely.
All right, terrific.
I'm here.
Me too. Hold on just a second. Let's get everybody recombobulated. There we are. So that was so interesting. And I'm going to pull up my chat as well. That was so interesting, Djimo. And I do have a few questions. And then every time I would write something down, you guys would answer my question for me. So it was a very complete and thorough description of everything that's going on. I will say there was a comment over in the chat that Douglas, he says that as the founder of a smart agri-tech startup that's based on aquaponics, I absolutely love this. So thank you,
I think we're
Douglas,
connected on LinkedIn.
Oh, really? Well, now he's watching your
Yeah.
presentation. So he says we are. So
Good
and I was
stuff.
going to
Good
say, I
stuff.
was going to remind everybody else, if you have other questions or comments, please go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And one thing, Djimo, when I was watching and the business piece, the business side of it, to me, which you guys ended up touching on there, was really interesting, because I was thinking about, when you're doing something like this on such a larger scale, what types of businesses are, besides the fish farms or things like that, but what are some other applications that businesses, or what businesses would use this type of not necessarily education, but this type of system in their businesses?
Yeah, I mean, a small aquaponic system can certainly be used as a model system. So before you actually, put a real farm together, it might be beneficial to practice it in a much lower risk environments, smaller scale. And so there's definitely that piece to it as far as training and professional development. But I would really encourage anyone to take a look at aquaponics as an emerging field, and also how it connects to surrounding agriculture techniques. As mentioned in the talk, aquaculture is growing just extremely quickly. I don't know if you've watched the controversial documentary Seaspiracy. Definitely a lot of facts, despite some sort of alarmist tone to it. But this is the reality. We need alternative food producing solutions, and we need to just work alongside nature a lot better. And so one of the things I always like to mention is that it's not just climate crisis that we face, and I say this sometimes with the risk of being received negatively, but it's much more graphic than carbon, than CO2 in our atmosphere, right? It's really a very violent physical invasiveness to our species against all others. And so what aquaponics really is to me is just this powerful analogy for how Mother Nature does things, how these cycles have taken just so long to establish, with so much complexity baked into them, and that we really need to either leverage them or respect them if we're going to be able to solve some of these problems. And so far, it's really not looking that good, although I'm quite hopeful. Becca asks, what's the creative process like to invent PlanetBox? Well, that's my favorite part, really, in this whole thing is, thinking about the engineering and the biology, less so the business, Wendy, despite your question, but it's really kind of figuring out how the living creatures function and how they work together and how you can kind of reduce inputs by leveraging what they're already capable of doing. So to me, kind of from 3D printing to designing new parts to sourcing new materials, that's really exciting to me, and not limited to the education space, but also in the commercial space. This talk is certainly about Just Learn and education, but I'm quite interested and fascinated by what's possible at a much larger scale with agriculture, with food production.
And I was going to say, I think that that's part of what I was actually trying to get at was like what, as you see the future of our planet moving forward and our need to feed everyone, how that will all work together. And now we're late in the process as a globe in the world to start to come up with some of these things. It feels like that we're going to run into some problems.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. We're late, but agriculture is just the most recent activity, really. It's so recent in geological timescale, right? So we have been hunters and gatherers for the longest time. I mean, but we've also been under 1 billion in population for most of that time, and so naturally we've settled and we've sourced fish and plants and fruits and berries and grain from these sort of where biodiversity is dense, and sometimes we depleted them and we moved on to the next. But now we're facing 8 billion people and growing, and it's just, you know, it doesn't add up. We cannot continue heading that direction. I see another question here. 3D printed parts is key, especially for solutions in regions like the rural developing world, where there's no Walmart for the farmers to buy parts. That is true. That is true. So actually, I'm going to use this to kind of mention something that is in the works for us. I'm personally from Mozambique in Southern Africa, and I'm engaged with a couple of communities, and most recently one in Malawi. And we're looking at recreating the Planet Box experience, except it's not sort of a developed country product that you saw, but it's packaged in a different scaled product that would actually benefit farmers. And so we're not so much trying to introduce environmental science curriculum, say, to your 7th grader or 9th grader, because that structure doesn't even exist in many of these countries, but to try and bring the tools together for small stake farmers, not just to learn about these new techniques, but also to learn how they can coexist with nature better in their current agriculture activities. And it might include a shipping container, but we'll definitely send out some more information when it's time for that.
Well, that's very, very exciting. So that's a great way to take your small little idea and turn it into something amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So I see, is that one of your planet boxes behind you there?
It is. I mean, I have one in the balcony and one there's a studio for photography as well. And yeah, I
So
have planter boxes all over.
that looks really, really great. So when I saw the setup that you showed in the classroom where they had the 3 side by side where the lizards ended up showing up, which is, you know, totally common for us anyways down here in Florida. But so how big is the whole is like one unit? It was kind of hard to see in that picture. And then let's say as you are in a classroom and you're wanting to grow some herbs, or you're going to have something that the kids can then also put on their salad or something like that later, how much plant material can you then have in the top?
Yeah, so this is our first design, our first scale. We're actually releasing bigger units as well. So this is just under 10 gallons, and we're going to release, 20, 30, 60, 90 gallon. And a lot of the educators we work with have either indirectly through other educators, connections through their students, through teams or clubs, green club, or your green team, for example, that schools usually have. there's already some initiative to connect core curriculum classes with on-campus activities such as your greenhouse, if they have one, or some raised beds and some gardens. One of my most favorite recent examples was in Marion County. So they were using a small planet box and they were dedicating it entirely for chives. And it was part really of a trial to see the feasibility of aquaponics and growing chives for their culinary, for their kitchen, excuse me, but through a culinary type of class. And so they were leveraging the planter box that was in a traditional core curriculum, but they were leveraging it for more of an elective setting, which was culinary, wasn't a core offering. And then on top of that, they ended up connecting with a agriculture teacher. So this is really the outcome that we want with planter boxes, not just to stick to our solution, but it's to kind of inspire them to use, design their own systems, use other systems that are out there on the market. And what really will allow us to do this now is with software that we've developed. So the software not only facilitates a lot of the data collection, a lot of the repetitive tasks that it's definitely fun the first 5-10 times you do it, but as an educator, if you're managing 6-7 classes, you need to be able to delegate tasks to students and to kind of keep track of what they're doing and compare their data accuracy and be able to even grade them or assess them. And so this is kind of like the second stage to Just Learn, is really developing the integration of these systems into the school setting. But it depends on what you grow. Strawberries grow really slowly. They are very nutrient intensive. So in the beginning, if you just throw strawberries right in the beginning, you're not going to grow large strawberries. But if you maybe wait 6 months until your nutrients really develop or accumulate, then your strawberries can actually come out decent. But for your greens, your leafy greens, your microgreens, aquaponics is not a problem whatsoever.
Oh, very interesting. We did have another question in the chat about how many students do you service in Hillsborough County and what other school districts are you in?
Yeah, so Hillsborough is growing very quickly. They're our biggest customers now. And they have expressed, they've indicated that environmental science as their science offering is actually not only the fastest growing, but it's on its way to become the biggest, their biggest science offering on par, and then even bigger than biology, which is usually where most enrollment is. So Hillsborough has around 10,000 environmental science students at the high school level. We are in every high school environmental science class. And so that actually started as a much smaller program. And when they introduced that offering, they introduced it with Planetbox. And over the last couple of years, we've grown our partnership with them. We're also in more rural districts like Marion County. We are up north in the Northeast, in the Massachusetts area, in Idaho, in Washington State, couple of schools here and there in California. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So just for anybody watching, Hillsborough County is the Tampa area where we are. Marion County is Ocala, just south of Gainesville, kind of middle of the state. But it sounds like you guys are just all over the entire US right now. And then, of course, looking to go into those international markets.
Right. Well, we are very small. We're really small early stage company, but I think we have good traction, and really we've shown the ability to that aquaponics is just so flexible and so versatile in how we can cover a multitude of curriculum. So I'm really excited for the next step as we continue growing not only our current offering, but also as we go to homeschooling and to more of a business to consumer type of offering as well.
Well, it's wonderful. It's fascinating. My son on his own has set up we have like 3 tanks of stuff that he's doing, just his own experiments. My 21-year-old, just because he loves fish and he wanted to have set up, sustainable tanks, and that's what we need to encourage our children and things to do. As we just said, there's, we need other ways to come up with food sources and things like that. So thank you so much for being here. How can people reach you, Djimo? I know you're going to be back in just a few minutes with Rebecca. And how can people reach you, or if they have questions about Just Learn, where can they find that information?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can reach me on LinkedIn, just my name, Djimo Serodio, and you can also Google Planet Box by Just Learn, and you'll find our website.
Okay, well, thank you so much.